So it would seem that we are getting our first proper mutant in the MCU thanks to the appearance of Sir Patrick Stewart in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Presumably playing Charles Xavier once again as he did in the past for the Fox X-Men films. That movie's trailer got me wondering, if the X-Men are coming to the MCU in the not too distant future, what storylines could Disney and Marvel pull from for the big screen? Well, that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm going to go through a small handful of them that I think could work on the big screen and talk about why. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I think at this point, I'm basically contractually obligated to talk about House of M whenever the topic of MCU X-Men stories comes up. While some people thought that WandaVision was going to be a pseudo-adaptation of this storyline, just swapping out some of the finer details for a weird sitcom element, in actuality, it wasn't that at all, meaning that the door is still open for a proper adaptation. And looking at the trailer for Multiverse of Madness, we might just be getting it in the not too distant future, either in that film itself or one not far down the road. In the comics, House of M went something kinda like this. At one point, Wanda had a full-on mental breakdown and used her reality warping abilities to change the way the world was. Everyone's lives were drastically different, and mutants were now the dominant species on the planet, seen as the superior ones over humans. And no one remembered anything about the way that things were before, except for Wolverine, because of course he did. Wolverine wound up pulling together a group of heroes, along with a young mutant who had the ability to telepathically show people how their lives were before, and went after Wanda and the rest of the mutant royal family, the House of Magnus. During an assault on Genosha, the island where the Magnus family resided, Magneto was shown the truth, and he went into a bit of a rage, nearly killing Quicksilver, who was actually the one who convinced Wanda to change reality as she did. This, of course, angers Wanda, who blamed all of the pain and struggle that her family had gone through in their life on their father's need to save all mutants, no matter the cost, and with a single iconic phrase, reverted reality back to the way it was before, but also stripped nearly the entire population of mutants across the globe of their powers. No more mutants indeed. Well, okay, some more mutants, I guess, because at least a few of them managed to keep their powers. But, I mean, close enough. This storyline set up a ton of future events involving the X-Men and other mutant characters, setting the stage for the next several years of comics. In fact, several of the other stories I'm going to talk about in this very video rely on House of M and the No More Mutant situation as a starting point for their plots. So having this happen in the MCU could be incredibly important. Many people have been theorizing for quite a while now that an inverse of that No More Mutants line could be what actually gives us mutants in the MCU, and that could very well be the case. However, if they want to do a bunch of these other X-Men storylines, that might not be the best way to go. Perhaps leaving House of M as something to look forward to once the mutants are properly established could be the best course of action. And I mean, we're already getting the beginnings of Wanda's mental fracturing, so just stretch that out a bit longer after Multiverse of Madness and call it square. Of course, that is just one of many ways that they could go with it. The MCU is nothing if not able to take the basic idea of a famous storyline and spin it to fit what they need for the story that they want to tell. So basically what I'm saying is, there are other options. If we are gonna see House of M, whether it be via Multiverse of Madness or some other future film, we might as well get all of the other follow-up bits, right? Messiah Complex is certainly an interesting storyline, one that would require a ton of setup to do right, but it could be super interesting. In that storyline, the X-Men learn about an infant who had been born in Alaska, who possessed the mutant gene, making them the first mutant born since the events of House of M, otherwise known as M-Day. As such, when word started to spread of this newborn, many different groups started to try to get their hands on her, for a variety of different reasons, including Bishop, who traveled from the future to try to kill the child, since apparently she grew up to be some kind of mutant antichrist, leading to the death of thousands upon thousands of people. Cable, however, felt that she was the one prophesied to save all mutant kind, making her a messiah of sorts. And so he set about trying to save the kid, which was certainly easier said than done, because I cannot stress this enough, a lot of different people wanted her for their own reasons. A lot of very powerful and very dangerous people. After a massive battle involving the X-Men and all of the other groups trying to get their hands on the kid, Cyclops begrudgingly allowed Cable to take the baby into the future, where she'd be probably the most safe. Naturally, she wound up coming back to the modern day eventually, this time as an older teenager, now called Hope Summers, named after her adoptive mother from the future. And then she went on to play a pretty big role in our next storyline. Now, if they were to adapt Messiah Complex for the MCU, its success would rely heavily on how they decided to adapt House of M. But there is a way that they could try to spin it without the whole Wanda removing mutant powers thing. By just having it so that when the MCU does get their mutants through whatever means, it only wound up giving like a very small handful of mutants to us, making this the first naturally born mutant, which would kind of be a big deal for that reason alone. And that's an idea that I'm going to expand upon just a little bit more in this next entry. What happens when two of the biggest super teams in comics find themselves on opposite sides of a potentially world-ending problem? Well, you get Avengers vs X-Men. In this comic storyline, we got to see Earth's mightiest heroes face off against the mutant saviors over an issue involving that previously talked about mutant messiah, Hope Summers, all due to the coming arrival of the Phoenix Force. See, on the page, this was a rather dark period for the X-Men. Charles Xavier was gone, most of mutant kind were depowered, and those that remained lived in seclusion on a small island off the west coast, largely keeping to themselves. Meanwhile, traveling through deep space was the Phoenix Force, the cosmic entity that once possessed Jean Grey and caused her to go mad with power, which was presently making a beeline straight for its new host, straight for Hope Summers. Detecting this, both the X-Men and the Avengers had drastically different takes on what the arrival of the Force could mean for Earth. The X-Men believed that Hope could use the Force to restore mutant kind to its former glory, returning the powers to all those who had lost them on M-Day. The Avengers, however, predicted that if it successfully managed to make its way to Earth and take hold of Summers, it would spell the end of life as we know it. So, kind of a minor difference in viewpoints on that one. Hoping to protect, all of life, Captain America went to the X-Men and asked to take Hope away, in order to protect her from the Force. Naturally, as you would expect, Cyclops didn't take too kindly to this, and thus the battle proper kicked off. The Avengers and X-Men wound up facing off in a few skirmishes here and there, while a small team of Avengers went and tried to keep the Phoenix Force from reaching Earth. Yeah, that plan didn't work out super well. As the Force ultimately reached Earth's orbit, the Avengers launched an experimental attack on it that wound up causing it to split and possess 5 members of the X-Men, creating the Phoenix Five, which was just as terrifying of a prospect as you're probably imagining right now. Yes, it was awesome, but also terrifying. From there, the story shifted a bit, becoming less Avengers vs X-Men and more everyone versus the Phoenix Five, as they tried and largely succeeded to subjugate the entire planet and bend it to their will. Eventually though, Hope Summers teamed up with Wanda Maximoff and was able to claim the power of the Phoenix Force for herself, which she used to simultaneously destroy it with Wanda's help and undo the effects of M-Day, returning powers to all those mutants who had formerly lost them, basically bringing an end to the House of M saga once and for all. Basically. Nothing in comics is really actually that basic. Now this could, even divorced from its House of M connections, serve a pretty solid purpose within the MCU. Let's say for a second that Disney and Marvel didn't really want to do an adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga. Honestly, I can't really say that I blame them there. They tried twice and failed spectacularly both times. However, the Phoenix Force is kind of a big deal within a lot of X-Men stories. So, they kind of need it around to a certain degree. Doing an Avengers vs. X-Men adaptation, at least a loose one, could be a solid place to introduce it, and it could be used to bring in a ton of new mutants, if whatever ultimately does bring the X-Men in only brings in a small handful of them. Just have whatever created mutants, or at least powered up the first ones, only create a small handful of them, and then suddenly this stuff with the Phoenix Force or whatever suddenly awakens the dormant mutant gene in a ton of people all over the world. Suddenly, boom, there are mutants everywhere. And they've kind of always been around since, you know, they're just people who had this gene and now it's active. Plus, I mean, come on. You couldn't tell me that seeing these two super teams go head to head wouldn't be awesome. So I'd like to see this storyline get adapted for the big screen for that reason alone. Let's get weird for a second here and pull out an X-Men storyline that you probably weren't expecting to see me talk about. The Brood Saga is basically what happens when comic book writers stay up all night watching Alien and decide that they want to do that, but with superheroes. And yes, I know that there have actually been a few comic storylines that are like Superman versus Xenomorphs or whatever, but I'm not talking about that. At this point in the comics, the X-Men were on the run alongside Carol Danvers after being branded enemies of the state by the US government. Hoping to get away for a while, the team accepted an invitation aboard a galactic starcruiser, upon which absolutely nothing went wrong and they were able to relax and enjoy themselves properly. No, of course not. The Brood attacked. The Brood are basically the Xenomorphs from Alien, a swarming insectoid race that shares a hive mind. The Brood had hoped to use the X-Men to create all new super-powered broodlings. Naturally, the team had no intention of becoming bug incubation chambers, so they fought back, giving us probably one of the best horror-themed stories in all of Marvel. Now, I know that Marvel Studio head Kevin Feige kinda poo-pooed the idea of doing an MCU horror film in the past, and the very concept of doing one sort of raises issues with audience demographics. No parent wants to take their kid to the latest big-budget superhero blockbuster and watches, you know, people are getting face-hugged and chest-bursted and cocooned to the walls of things and just all sorts of gross alien stuff. Don't want to give little Timmy nightmares about space bugs, but it would be awesome. And, now that I think about it, Disney owns all of the Fox properties. So we could just cut to the chase and instead of doing the Brood, we could have actual Xenomorphs. It's not gonna happen, but you can't tell me it wouldn't be awesome. And as someone who's been a lifelong fan of the Alien film franchise and generally enjoys superhero media, I wouldn't really complain if they gave it to us. Let's talk about a story that has Deadpool in it, or at least could have Deadpool in it. Back when 20th Century Fox was producing all of the X-Men related films, we heard a lot of talk about them wanting to produce an X-Force movie. But, as we all know, that never happened. The closest thing we got was a bit of a drawn-out gag in Deadpool 2. But it could happen in the MCU. We would just need a solid story to go off of. And I think I know of a good one. I'm talking about the Apocalypse solution. In this comic storyline, Deadpool stumbles into the Temple of Apocalypse and discovers a group that is attempting to resurrect the mutant god. After tangling with one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Deadpool is captured and the X-Force, made up of Archangel, Psylocke, Phantom X, and Wolverine, get in there to save the Merc with the Mouth, while trying to stop the cultists from achieving their goal. Spoiler alert, they do wind up saving Deadpool, as you would imagine. However, they fail to stop the cultists from resurrecting Apocalypse, who winds up being reborn into the body of a young boy. So the team sets out to face off against the Horsemen and the young Apocalypse. After a few battles, they manage to get a hold of the boy and discover that he is yet to truly remember his life as old Apocalypse. So the team debated whether or not they should kill the child, as they had originally intended, or train him in an attempt to stop him from becoming the mad tyrant once again. The whole argument is really rendered moot, however, once Phantom X puts a bullet in the kid. Kinda harsh, but this is Apocalypse we're talking about here, so I can't really say that I blame him. Could be a cool story to not only introduce the X-Force to the MCU, but also Apocalypse as a character if they wanted to avoid doing another Age of Apocalypse adaptation, since that last one with Fox didn't exactly go super well. Finally, let's end with a bit of a doozy of a story that could honestly work pretty good as one of the earliest stories in the MCU involving the X-Men. Gifted is the name of the storyline that occurred during the first few issues of the third volume of the Astonishing X-Men series. It saw the formation of a new X-Men team as a company called Benetech Laboratories announced that they had produced a cure for mutants, stating that it would allow mutants to reclaim their real humanity, which is kind of horrible when you think about it. Upon investigating the laboratory, Beast discovered that the cure was the product of horrific, not to mention totally illegal, human experimentation, and sponsored by an alien warrior named Ord. Naturally, the X-Men swooped in and tried to shut things down, only to discover that Colossus, who had been thought dead for a while at this point, was actually alive and within the labs. So along with his help, they were able to shut the operation down and defeat Ord. Within the MCU, this could work great as a first story. Think about this for a second. What if whatever happens and activates the dormant mutant gene in people all across the globe, giving us the X-Men and all associated characters? Naturally, there are going to be some people who wake up one morning with superpowers who don't want it and just want to go back to being normal people. Could have some shady organization use the guise of a cure to actually get a hold of and study mutants, warranting some action from a new team of superheroes made up of mutants, which would of course be the X-Men. It could be a super solid introduction to the mutant race, and a proper start for the theme of humanity and what it means to be human that is often explored by X-Men related stories. Honestly, there are a ton of great X-Men stories that could make their way to the big screen. Way more than I could ever possibly cover in this video. So if you want to see me talk about some more, go ahead and leave a comment saying that you want to see that, and maybe we'll get around to doing a follow-up video in the future. Who knows? YouTube is a crazy place. We could do it next week, we could do it next year. Just gotta let us know that you want it. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video, and now I want to know what you think. Which mutant-focused storylines would you like to see on the big screen? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos in the future.